All right.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Shall we start?
Mark will be the first to talk, or Ruby?
No, maybe I'm happy for. I think Ruby.
Is it okay? Yeah. Is it okay if I just start off something here?
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just butting in here, partly because I feel a little bit like, okay, let's. So I just wanted to say welcome to everybody who has joined us, apart from, of course, so our speaker, Ruby. It's really great to see you. And I really look forward to your presentation about the article, Judgment Like a Spiderweb, catching Dominic Ongwen in the language of the International Criminal Court. Superb article, and I cannot wait to hear some of the thoughts behind it and so on. Also want to say, of course, thank you very much to Flávio, Professor Flávio, for I can't find my words, for hosting and for organizing the kind of the Zoom event and so on. And it's just an honor to have you around. Same for Renske. I have read stuff of you, but I've never seen what you look like, so it's great as well. And then there's Mark Drumble. So how are you doing, Mark? There are also other participants in the room. I can't quite see it because a little bit like I'm never super great at all of this technology, Zoom technology. It all merges together with MS Teams and FaceTime and everything. So, but welcome to all the other people that have joined us as well. Just as Ruby said a few times, and I think it's really important, we'd like to record the event, partly because not necessarily to make it available to the wider public, but just so that we can maybe look at it again or send it on to other people that were not able to participate at the event or come to the event. So if you're all okay with that, that is superb. If you prefer not to be kind of part of the recording, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat function, if that's okay. And maybe if you want to go a step further, take your name away from the little square. But I would also like to invite you later on, when there is maybe more opportunity for questions, to just put on your camera if you wish to kind of join this little group, because it's nice to see people's faces. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to do that. So we had a bit of a discussion beforehand with Flávio, Renske, and Mark, and we thought it would be really good for if Ruby would start off the conversation. And just maybe talk for a short while about your article. I will leave it up to you what it is that you want to say, okay? And then we'll just take it maybe in turns. We'll see who will want to go first after Ruby. That would be great, okay? So if everybody is happy with that, I'm now going to mute myself and I'll let Ruby talk, okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Solange. It's really great to see everyone here. So I suppose just to take it back to basics for those of you who may not be familiar with this topic, the subject is a particular judgment that came out recently from the International Criminal Court. So this is a court that is set up to try to end impunity, as they put it, trying to hold those responsible accountable for their crimes. And these are massive crimes: war crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression and genocide. And they want to also help prevent those crimes from happening again. So that's the sort of aim that the International Criminal Court sets out for itself. They say this cause is the cause of all humanity. This is their kind of motto. So by looking at this judgment, I was trying to question whether they were in fact able to see all of humanity and further those aims that they set out for themselves. So this judgment is about Dominic Ongwen, just admitting people as they come along, who was a child soldier in the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, and he rose to the position of brigade commander. So he took on quite a lot of responsibility. He grew up within an army that became basically his family. And he was prosecuted by the ICC, as I'll just refer to it in shorthand, the International Criminal Court, for, I think it was 65 counts of 61 war crimes and crimes against humanity, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. So my question really was, is this right, essentially? And let's look at how this happened, and is this the kind of justice that international criminal law should be working towards? So I looked at the judgment and the language of the judgment, and it seemed to me that whoever wrote this judgment, it's sort of a collective project, a number of people put it together, that the judgment was kind of portraying Dominic Ongwen very clearly as a perpetrator and not as a victim of this war. And he'd been a child of this war. So it seemed as though that line was a little bit fragile, the line between victimhood and being a perpetrator. But within the judgment, it seemed that that line was very steadfast. So there were clear depictions of victims, everyone except for Dominic Ongwen, basically, and then a clear depiction of one perpetrator. And it seemed as though this suited the aim of international criminal law, which is to prosecute certain individuals, perhaps almost symbolically, to hold them accountable for these enormous, enormous crimes. And so I was questioning in various ways how the language was crafted to uphold that victim-perpetrator binary in a way that we might actually want to question, because surely the aim of such a system of justice might be better fulfilled if it could appreciate complexities that went beyond this divide of the victim and the perpetrator. So to briefly lay out the metaphor that I used, the spider web, this came from an analogy within the hearing itself. The defense lawyer said the cobweb pleading of this case, the strategy of just throwing everything possible at Dominic Ongwen, all the charges they could manufacture, making it very difficult for him to defend himself against them all. So he kind of got stuck in the cobweb. That was the analogy used. And I thought, talking to Solange about this, maybe it's more of a spider web, actually, a living web with a spider, namely the International Criminal Court itself, sort of waiting patiently in a corner for a fly to come along to trap it in its language. And so then I started to explore how the language itself could be making a kind of spider web of victimhood, of victim experiences. So these are sort of focused on individual accounts to draw in a reader's empathy, and then they kind of extrapolate out from those individual stories to try to hold a sense of immense criminality and suffering. And then against that web of victimhood, this single characterized Ongwen can appear in stark contrast as someone with whom we don't empathize, someone who we see as somehow different and definitely to blame in a way that suits the aims of international criminal law. So I hope that kind of just lays out the article, and if you're interested in the kinds of analysis I do with language, do have a look at the details of it. But I think at that point I'll just pass over to whoever wants to step in now and speak a little more.
Excellent. So thought-provoking, so insightful, I think. It's so, I don't know, maybe I should certainly not be the first person to talk. And I think between Flávio, Mark, Renske and me, we're going to have to try and find maybe a little storyline and order. But, just really insightful. And like I kind of enjoyed the new way of looking at this legal framework, like with the analysis, literary analysis and so on that you've done. And I can see so many other ways in which we can take this, just simply because you alluded to it, you kind of open the door to so much more, which I think is great. But let me not be the person to start off, because I feel like I may be too closely linked to your piece. So I wanted, I think, to hear others. So between Flávio, Mark, and Renske, is there anybody who would prefer to start talking? I think, I hope this is a really safe environment. And let me reiterate as well to others, please feel free to ask questions, to come in, raise your hand, use the chat function just to maybe continue some of the discussions that we're having, okay? It'd be lovely to hear from all of you. So not having anybody, Flávio, would you like to, you prefer to? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'd like to offer the opportunity to Renske or Mark, first of all. Please, you can start, or I can do it. Mark would like to?
You go first, then I'll go
Okay.
second. I actually have a image that I would like to show, and I don't know how to do it. So I sent it to Solange. So
I now have it. It's fine. I'm prepared, and it was kind of that was kind of why I wanted not to talk, because I just needed to see what happened.
So Flávio, why don't you break the ice?
All right. Well, I'm really happy because it's easier to talk before you. I'm sure about that. Well, Ruby, I'd like to tell you again. Have I told you that I'm really impressed with your research? I'd like to say hello to all of you, to thank you for those who are here with us. And about your research, it really brought me some new feelings about first of all, the purpose itself of universal criminal justice. What are you talking about? Are we talking about, well, I'm talking from Brazil, a South American country. And we always discuss here about the European or vision of justice. And this is a very interesting point, because when we talk about Africa and its hundreds and hundreds of different cultures, we have the same context in South America. That's why your research, even if it focuses on this specific trial, it brought to me many information. I have to read it again many times, because for sure that I'll have many other conclusions and feelings about that. But I'd like to tell you and to bring my context to you. In Brazil, we have more than 400 different indigenous cultures. And I deal with the indigenous genocide in Brazil. For those who do not know, we have in South America and also in Brazil, a real genocide happening in relation to the indigenous nations. And when we talk about an universal criminal justice, we learn about some under a utopic vision that now we'll have a real justice for the victims. And I remember now the words of Mark when he arrived today, and he says, well, the lawyers, the jurists are so, please correct me, Mark, if I understood right, but correct, but you told us the lawyers are so hopeful with the ICC, and I am a defender of the ICC for sure. I have a close friend of mine, Silvio Steiner, that was the Brazilian judge at the ICC during many years. And when we read your article, it becomes more clear how I don't know if it's the correct term, but how the West vision of justice, of the European vision of justice, is still predominant. Please tell me if my English is clear to you. If it's how it is predominant, overwhelming the native cultures, the traditional cultures. In Brazil, we say traditional lands, traditional culture, traditional nations. They were here before Brazil was discovered by the Portuguese, right? And we have the same question here. The question, the main issue of your research, at least under my first impression, is that we cannot, if we seek for a real justice system, we cannot forget that the habits, the way of life, the words, they have a deeper meaning if we understand that these different cultures, from the West culture, the industrialized countries, the capitalist countries, transmit to us much more than only words or legal framework and patterns. What I mean is that the land, the rivers, the religions, the different religions, they have a cosmological meaning. When you say, I took some notes here. When you say that the meaning of its words depend on who is speaking and to whom, actually is the people, the land, and the language, it means that we cannot talk about justice if the spiderweb created by the ICC formulas makes impossible to the judges or anyone else to understand the situation of the defendant. Well, how come? I had not thought about that until read your article. How come a child soldier, a victim of a system, is at the same time defendant before the same group of victims, child soldiers? We are not saying that we do not need, we can, we must look for justice, but we must understand the roots of this problem. And if the ICC language is now an instrument of that avoid the comprehension of these roots, we will never achieve an ideal justice sphere. And if the ICC that nowadays is facing a lot of challenges, right? The world is, I don't know what will must happen from now on after this war in Ukraine. I think we have real strong impacts on our system. But the intention of the ICC is to become a universal court, international criminal court, a permanent one. I had already questioned the fact that we have the common law, we have the Roman system, and we do not have, and they have been talking about that, but we do not have yet a clear presence of the Islamic legal system, for example. Is it or is it not a universal criminal court? And we cannot talk about law, we cannot talk about justice if we not consider the traditional cultures and the languages, not only the oral or the written, but all kinds of language that a culture can offer to us. Not without reason, Raphael Lemkin, when he wrote Axis Rule in Occupied Europe, the classic book about the idea of genocide, he wrote about ethnocide, the cultural genocide that was not accepted by the countries that decided how should be written the Convention for the Prevention and Repression of Genocide. But if a culture disappears, it is an ethnocide. It's a cultural genocide. It is under a sociological point of view. When I read your article, I remember some words from Ludwig Wittgenstein. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And I think your article is so clear, so perfect in this sense. But I have to think much more about that. Well, I think I talked about 10 minutes or 15. I'll give the word back to Solange, and then we can go on. Thank you very much for your attention, and congratulations again.
Thank you. Can I say one? Just to point out the quote that you used, Flávio, Acholi is the people, the land, and the language. I think that's quite early on, but it was an interview I did with someone who speaks Acholi and who's worked with people involved in the war. And so she was basically saying this Acholi, which we, in the West we might say is a language in the sense we understand English. It's actually a way of life, is what she was trying to. Yeah, so exactly what you were saying.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you for your great job.
So actually, it might help me to come in slightly, and as well, Ruby, please do, if there's anything at any moment you kind of want to join in or throw into the conversation, please do. Because so many points that you raised there, Flávio, are so interesting and so true. And one of the things that I wrote down was, one of the points that I wanted to make was actually around translation and the difficulty, but also the creating of a narrative. And we have to be really careful, I think, when we read these judgments to kind of put them back into a context. And I think there, Ruby, you say at one point about the decisions that were being made around how to translate certain words. And then that made me think back to, okay, so when you have a judgment like this, those decisions actually will direct, they will kind of they will put in a little box or put parameters around what it is that we will understand and what we won't understand. It will change the story slightly. And so I thought, like, whoa, I want to be able to think a little bit more around that. So about how those decisions around translation then direct narrative, but also what does it leave out? And why is it leaving those stories out of the equation? Why are we not, why? Yeah, so it's around being maybe more cognizant of that which is happening when you're working in a system where there's a different language or different languages. But I think, Flavio, you're absolutely right. It goes much further, right? It goes to the essence of the cultures that you're looking into, to the people that are involved in that particular story, in that particular place. But so I don't know. Ruby, did you want to say anything, or you're okay? Shall I move on to?
Great. Yeah, let's move on.
I'm happy to jump in.
So I'm going to share my screen whilst Mark is talking, and hopefully it will work. Okay, so here we go.
So I think the starting point that I'd like to use actually fits very nicely with Solange's point about narratives, Ruby. But let me first start by saying I really enjoyed your paper. I thought it was beautifully and elegantly written. I really enjoyed your use of metaphor and analogy, in particular, the spider and the fly. And I think what I would like to do is start by talking a little bit about that, what that got me thinking of and how it got me thinking. So The Spider and the Fly actually is a poem written by British poets who wrote this poem. That's it. Okay. So it's a poem from 1829 by Mary Howitt, and it's a poem that's actually about seduction and flattery. And it's a poem about how the spider lures its victim into the web, into its lair, notwithstanding the protestations of the particular victim. And actually the first line of the poem is like one of the best known lines in sort of colloquial English speaking. The opening line to it is, "Will you come or will you walk into my parlor?" said the spider to the fly. "It's the prettiest little parlor that you ever may spy. And the way into the parlor is a winding stair, and I have many curious things to show you when you are there." And the fly, this is me paraphrasing, but then the fly says, "Oh, no, 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 no," said the little fly, "to ask me is in vain, for everyone who goes up your winding stair will never come down again." And then the poem goes on through a whole series of different stanzas. And of course, we know what happens in the end, right? In the end, the spider's unremitting flattery, charm, adulation, playing to all of the insecurities of the fly, speaking of the fly's radiant, beautiful eyes, and like absolutely fine, delicate wings. So that the spider goes on. And then in the end, the fly meets her demise. I like the picture because it's also deeply gendered in a lot of ways. You have the spider. I'm not sure if you can see it on Solange's screen or not, but you have the spider who has this dastardly look, all like nicely dressed. He's got his 8 legs with like beautiful little shoes and socks, and they're in the web. And then you have the fly, who's this damsel in distress in the lower corner, holding an umbrella in her last fateful moments. So when I read your paper, I thought of this poem second. What I thought of first was a little nursery rhyme that I used to remember saying to my kids about the itsy bitsy spider. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout, down came the rain. And I remember singing this to the kids in the car, and all varieties of plays on words. But there was no fly in that. So I think what I'd really like to do is start off with your metaphor that I think is remarkably rich in terms of so many different themes. So one is the role of international criminal law as flatterer and as seduction. A second is one aspect of the metaphor you don't go to, namely what happens to the thing, whatever it may be, that is caught in the web. The fly caught in the web dies. It's eaten by the spider. And it's eaten in a way that is a hollowing out. And I thought very interesting in your paper on page 87, at least what I have is page 87, you talk about Ongwen's voice as being hollowed out in this process. I think I would go further to say that Ongwen as an entirety is hollowed out by this process, largely eaten from the inside out, and all that's left is a skin to flutter in the web. And the third thing that I'd like to talk about, so we've got hollowing out, right? You know, the spider eating the fly. And secondly, we've got this idea of temptation, seduction, the allure of law. And then the third thing is spiders build webs and take them down, right? They don't last forever. They last temporarily, and spiders are very good at constantly respinning webs in different places. So let me sort of talk about all those three in turn, and then I think I'd like to bounce it back to you. I do think the arts of international criminal law is seduction in many ways, and I actually think it's one of the weakest points of international criminal law more generally. Years ago, I did a blog symposium on a book by Phil Clark, and what I wrote in that is how international criminal law doesn't really know how to love people very well, doesn't make anyone feel particularly good about itself. It's a very unsuccessful flatterer. And I think that perhaps it wouldn't necessarily be in the best interests of everyone for international criminal law to flatter better. But I think it would be better if international criminal law actually learned to respect and love the dignity of people, all kinds of peoples, better. And I think this is a big learning lesson from your particular paper. Victims' voices are overridden. Boxes are created too categorically and too simply. Ongwen is completely left, you know, dangling in the web, his putative power vastly overstated in order to secure his conviction, without recognizing, as I'd written elsewhere, that Ongwen was born a child and became an adult, was not born a cruel adult, which is basically the narrative of the prosecution. And here the defense also overly simplifies, constantly presenting Ongwen as only a child soldier, forever in and throughout time, intertemporally, which is also inaccurate in the sense that he did grow and change and assumed positions of tremendous power. So I think there's a lack of love in the process of appreciating the human condition. And I really, really enjoyed your metaphor. It sort of got me thinking of that a little bit. And then there's the hollowing out, right? The second point, which I think international criminal law seems to leave everyone it touches deeply unsatisfied. It's not this I looked up online because I wanted to see what the spider and the fly poem, what happened to it subsequent to its initial writing, which I remember from my high school English lit class. So apparently the Rolling Stones did a version of The Spider and the Fly off the 1965 Satisfaction album, in which they sort of substituted spiders and flies, retaining the analogy, but likening it to musicians and the process of concerts, which is another sort of version of a seduction in a certain sense, right? A certain kind of audience reaching. And I think we could make a lot of analogies between the International Criminal Court and a music concert in some way, right? In terms of multiple players appropriating the work, for example, of a famous composer. Take Chopin playing music into choppy waters, so to speak. And that's what I got out of the Satisfaction song. And then it got me thinking, international criminal law is utterly incapable of satisfying anyone. It's perennially falling short in so many ways. And I think this riffs back to some of your central arguments: decontextualization, lack of aesthetics and sensibilities, excessive simplifications. So what do we do about that? What do we do about a powerful spider that lures individuals in? And I think in Ongwen's case, he himself surrendered. I don't think he had sort of this hostile reaction to the International Criminal Court, right, initially. And I actually thought it would be something that it proved not to be for him. leaving not only himself unsatisfied, but virtually everyone else involved in the process. So what do you say about that? Sort of, what do you do about that in that particular context? So how about I just leave it at that? And I'll put sort of the third analogy to the side for now, because I think I've spoken long enough. But that's sort of what I wanted to throw out.
Great, thanks so much. Ruby, is there anything you want to or do you want to respond to? So much richness in what Mark, and I love the fact that I was actually not only able to show an image, but I was actually really able to do it. I thought I wasn't going to be able to, so thank you for stretching me on that one.
Well, actually, I do have one more question. So Ruby, for you, what made you think of spiders, webs, and flies?
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Mark. That was so interesting. And yeah, I have a question for you actually, which is how do you, in your own work and in this work, how do you sort of allow metaphor to stimulate your thinking? Because, like you said, with the music concert and what you draw from that, and then you move on to another metaphor, it'd be really interesting to hear what. And so for me, with the fly and the spiderweb, it did come from listening to that defense speech where they mentioned the cobweb. And I was looking for a metaphor because it helps me as a critic. And I don't know if you've read Metaphors We Live By, this book. So I sort of said, this is a metaphor that I can read by, and it'll help me to navigate my way through this, 1,000-page judgment, to have something in mind by which I can kind of structure my thinking and then press it, something to challenge me as well. So I guess it came to me from the hearing itself, as I wanted to sort of be authentic to the hearing, but
But also, I think if going back to, I know Solange put it on, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I'm just quite enthusiastic about this. The picture, though, the imagery from the 1829 poem, I also think deeply reveals, and I do think there's an inherent, the picture is so deeply gendered, nothing to do with the ICC, but I think it does reflect in many ways how we see of law, particularly the International Criminal Court, stepping in, fixing all these problems, solving all these problems. Everything the ICC falls short in is never its own fault. It's always the fault of somebody else, right? Which is another sort of typical behavior pattern, right? When someone's acquitted, it's the fault of the judges. When an investigation goes awry, it's a fault of recalcitrant states, right? When something is not properly communicated, it's some cultural problem, and the technocratic expertise of ICL wasn't able to apply properly, right? And then we have this stereotyping of victims in this completely helpless, distressed role, which certainly in my work with victims is not really how a lot of victims see themselves, and can be a very hobbling way of seeing oneself.
Yeah.
And then just because Ongwen is in the dock, just because it's possible to build a conviction, he's presented not only in numbers of charges, as you point out, but in the rhetoric. You listen to the opening statement. I know you did, you drew cobweb from it. Like, it was all presented as this man is Machiavelli on steroids, as this omnipotent, hyper masculinized individual. And it's just not, that doesn't mean he shouldn't be found guilty. Those are all different conversations. No. But the performativity. As you were saying,
then the defense responded in also an oversimplified way. And I was wondering, as I was listening to their speeches, how could they have responded in a different way rather than playing the same game? Because then it becomes, either he's this boy or he's this othered kind of, as you were saying, this, what was the word you used for it? But sort of like, I don't know, subhuman maybe, or he's just not someone with whom we associate. And what's the middle ground? Because as you said, he grew up, he changed, and how could a defense acknowledge that, I suppose, is a question I'm left with.
Well, and the ICC, so I participated in an amicus brief with Kamari Clark and Aaron Baines. We submitted a brief to the ICC. I thought it was damn good and really interesting. And the ICC totally, like, they requested lots of amicus briefs in this case, and ours just got like, it didn't even get ensnared in the web. They didn't even bother building a web to ensnare us to talk about it any further. We didn't taste good enough. It wasn't worth it. Right? So I got summarily discounted. So this is, but the other thing, this is the last thing, and then I'll stop. On all of these conversations, I'm not sure if the institution actually ever really wants to think about things the way that we're thinking about them. So then I sort of wonder what the point is talking about them in this way when they don't really want to be engaged with in this fashion. And what is increasingly that saying about the shrinking of discourse internationally or academically or socially about how we come to terms with great pain. And there's a monopolization of technocracy, and our conversations tend to be more sidebar. That's cool. It's nice to be contrarian and sidebar. It's vastly more interesting. And you ask me, why do I like metaphor? Well, after you've taught international criminal law for 20 plus years, it just gets boring and ineffective. So that's a very visceral response. But I think the power of imagery is crucial. And that's how most people see these things. They don't see them technocratically. And that's important, I think, including victim communities.
Right, as in how the ICC portrays itself. Is that what
no, how they feel, how do people feel pain, tragedy, transition, redemption, justice, accountability? I very few people see this through the vocabulary of law or feel it that way.
I see what you mean.
And that's why I think this is important, to really touch, to love properly.
Right, to join the law to that way of perceiving.
I mean, one thing we sort of erudite transnationalists never or give too little attention to is the vast majority of people in the world fundamentally see all these existential questions of pain, tragedy, and overcoming through faith and through religion and through spirituality, right? That's one of the greatest driving forces.
Yeah, it was interesting in this judgment to see them trying to grapple with spirituality. They had to some degree, right? And I'm not sure what you all think about how they did that, whether that became minimized too. But it was strange to see people trying to explain spirituality within the hearing itself, and the judges sort of taking this in a very was it holistic? Was it really able to grasp or not? But it was there. It was kind of present. It was trying to be part of the process.
No, absolutely. What I thought was interesting was on that particular point, again related to you, because you actually mentioned spiritualism, and then you in your article you say, well, it's actually only vis-a-vis Ongwen that it was somehow not necessarily taken into account seriously, but it was somehow given a space, whereas it wouldn't have worked the other way around. I'm not necessarily sure what I think about that, but I think it's kind of, it's so neatly related, I think, to the things that Flávio was saying at the start, that there is also a much broader view of international criminal law and the world in which it intervenes and it interacts with others. When Flávio, you were talking about cosmological meaning and so on, the kind of, it's not so simply just people, and it's only about people, it's about so much more. But thank you so much, Mark and Ruby. But I think, Renske, I don't know if you have something you want to share?
Yes, thank you so much. And first of all, Ruby, for writing such a neat piece. Such good work. And also others, I'm just, also for inviting me into this discussion and this community. Like I'm just so much enjoying the discussion and the reflections, and maybe also just to open up that invitation to those who've joined us and we're sitting in the dark to join in. I think my comments will tie in quite well with Mark's discussion, which is not at all surprising, because Mark's work was also very much in mind when I was reading this, as was my colleague Sophia Stokes' work. In my own work, I often ask this question around law and international law and literature, and I'm always curious, like, what kind of questions can be asked in a particular literary style. And with regards to ICL, I'm always just so puzzled with, on the one hand, this like ambition for the complexities of justice and to do justice to those complexities, and at the other end, this absolute need for to establish beyond a reasonable doubt this person's implication in some crime, and very much the lack of nuance that you find there. And then also, and that's of course something that Sophia has pointed out, and she would say probably absurdity of then needing to establish the evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person committed a crime. But then why does that person's character start to feed in to that discussion? Because certainly a person's character is not on trial, or shouldn't it be? It's certainly not a crime for Ongwen to join a game of cards with the young soldiers, right? Like, why is that so crucial? And these questions of, and particularly international criminal law, and probably also because of the gravity of the crimes that we are dealing with, just seems to call for something beyond law, for us to reckon with. Who are these persons? And we contrast them with these victims who then become like helpless or near holy, but like, what is going on there? And how much do we need to excuse? I always think, do we need to excuse ourselves that we could not be in any situation where we would ourselves face, let alone commit such crimes? Like, do we need to exclude these perpetrators from humanity to sort of save our own image of ourselves? And I think with Ongwen, that becomes like especially pertinent because of this dual identity of the person. And we are worried to feel for him because of what he has also done. And we are afraid to judge him for what he has done because of what he has also experienced himself. And this person seems to defy in that way so much this binary that international criminal law demands. And in that sense, I was, Mark, so much reminded of your work. And Ruby, I liked how then in your article this notion of coherence pops up, like this need for coherence. And I'm also I've been thinking about the Spiderweb in that sense as this web that offers a coherence in the narrative, but at the same time, it is completely multi-directional. And those seem to me two key characteristics of a spiderweb. And I also find that peculiar in a sense, because international criminal law, or the decision, is so much against multi-directionality. Like that, it needs actually all the directions to tie into that one point where the fly is trapped and the spider can hollow him out. And this seems completely at odds with perhaps a very, everyday experience of thinking, well, in the end, the truth or the reality is just the compilation of all the versions that exist about this one conflict or this one person or this decision. And some absolute truth is the composite of all of that. And yet all these composites can be tied in and drawn into that web to establish some form of coherence. And there, I think it's not just a metaphor, as you point out, but it's also a method, not just object of study, but also a method deployed by the ICC maybe, but also by you to draw in so much. And I think you've done a very neat job at presenting that. So thank you for that. And maybe I will leave it at that to allow for more discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Renske. That was, yeah, it's taken me now in different directions. That's the multi-directionality, I suppose, of it all, which I completely get what you mean. Because it goes off that way, but also those ways. So there's this circular idea. Yeah, so lovely. Ruby, did you want to respond a little bit?
Sure, that was so interesting, Renske. Thank you. Yeah, and I just had a few thoughts in response. I think definitely I was sort of imitating what the judgment was doing in the criticism itself, right? So it's kind of a limitation of the criticism as well, because I'm trying to reflect the limitation of the judgment. So yeah, exactly. And maybe that's something that I sort of value in criticism, kind of reflecting the subject matter and in it itself. But then also you were saying about,
I think Heybatollah has a question. I'm not sure if I saw that correctly, because I saw a hand coming up. So hello.
Sorry. Hello. Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm sorry for being too late, but I joined the meeting, I think, when Robbie has finished her presentation. I just want to thank you for all of you, and also for good presentation and good paper of Robbie. When for the first time I received her paper, it was very interesting for me, because it was a kind of analogy, and it was a kind of mixing of law and literature. And also it gave me some ideas, for example, law and language, and how the language may serve the justice, how the culture, how the ICC, for example, may interpret law, which is in, for example, in English language, or as Flávio said, which is background by different ideas or legal concepts, how it will be realized in a universal justice. So it was very interesting for me. And also I, as the publisher of the Journal of International Criminal Law, it was a great opportunity for me to review. Actually, I also reviewed the paper, because the topic was very interesting for me. And I think Robbie's paper is a starting point for doing research regarding cultural aspects and cultural values, and also different aspects of justice, because we need to reach to this idea that justice is a common concern for all of us. It doesn't matter if we are different in, we are living in different culture or different countries, but what we need all is justice. And at the moment I am working on a paper or on a project, global criminal justice and local voices. And I think the Robbie's paper will help me to understand the subject better. And the last point is that I need to say congratulations to Flávio, because he has been appointed as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Criminal Law. So the journal is welcoming papers from all the scholars from different states and different universities. And because this is the first, as far as I know, the first journal in the field of international criminal law in the West Asia. So I want to invite all the scholars, Solange and Mark and the other professors to contribute to the journal. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. So you were the organizer of this panel. I'm just wondering whether I should let you finish the discussion, because I'm also a little bit aware that we are coming up to the end of the hour, and I know that some of us have commitments right after this, so we might need to leave. So I don't know, shall I, Heybatollah, do you want to finish the...
Yeah, just I want to add something. I want to thank you, Solange, for good moderating, and because I was to moderate, but you did it, and I thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm a bit bossy, I'm so sorry. I couldn't see you.
No, that's your favor to me. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I've just got all red because so I just didn't know that you were there. So I apologize for that. So all I wanted to do maybe then is to just ask if, just to double check that nobody else wants to, or nobody else has questions or has comments to make, you know, and that is to everybody, of course. But if there aren't any, then I'd really like to thank everybody, the panelists, Renske, Flávio, Mark, and absolutely Ruby, of course, to thank you for participating. Heybatollah for organizing this. It was such an inspired idea. And hopefully we'll have many more of these kinds of conversations. I love the kind of informal nature of just bouncing ideas and so on. So let's have many more of these, and hopefully everybody else will still join us. So shall we just give a big applause to Ruby for her excellent piece. And if that's it, then maybe, sorry?
Thank you, that's all.
Right. Oh, somebody's just wanting to come in at the end of the session. But so all I can say is great. Hopefully we will speak again soon, and it was great to have you. Bye-bye from me. I'm going to leave and see you all
so much
soon.
for coming. Oh, and if anyone wants the recording, we will provide it. Just send
Professor
me an email.
Heybatollah, just to remember, because we have a question here about the recording of this session, I will send the link to Professor Heybatollah, and for those who want to have access to the recording, Professor Heybatollah or all of us, I will send you to all of you, can send the link for those interested, right? It will not be open, and that's why that's how we decided at the beginning of the session, right?
Great. But can I just, some of the people that are in the room, I wouldn't know how to forward the link, for instance, because I don't know them. So if they could email me, that would be great, or via Ruby, that's great as well, or via Renske or Flávio. Yeah?
Yes.
So if you want a copy of the recording, let one of the panelists know, and we can certainly forward it to you.
I wrote also my email on the chat, and
great.
Maybe if an email to the Journal of International Criminal Law also.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Great piece, Ruby.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Oh.